Good afternoon, class. Mr. O'Rourke again. We're going to be today talking about ancient Egypt. What you will need to do for this video is take notes, preferably using the Cornell method, but if you want to use a different method, that is fine. And there will be a quiz Monday morning when you arrive in class on the notes. So pay attention, take notes. If you need to go back and revisit, go back and revisit, rewind, all that other stuff you can do because it's a video. Okay, ancient Egypt, formed along the Nile River Valley 5,000 years ago. Most of Egypt's a desert, so the people lived near the Nile where the water was, provided the water for drinking and for crops. Every year the Nile would flood, and it would provide rich deposits of silt, the stuff the river carries along with it, which acted as a fertilizer to make the crops grow. It was also a highway for trade and travel because it's the longest river in the world. Okay, Nile, like I said, longest river in the world. It flows from the south, from east central Africa, what's known as Lake Victoria, way down here, kind of on the borders of Uganda and Kenya and Rwanda. And that is the source. The Nile, as it makes its way to the Mediterranean, traveling 4,000 miles, has 6 major cataracts or waterfalls, like Niagara Falls, throughout them. And it also has several branches that join into the river, the Blue Nile, the White Nile, and a couple other smaller rivers that feed from the highlands of Ethiopia and Sudan. Ancient Egypt. First 2,000 years of Egyptian history divided into 3 periods, and we'll go through each one specifically in a couple of minutes. You had the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdoms. The ancient civilizations developed an advanced civilization. They built huge cities out of stone, invented hieroglyphics, a system of pictographs which became the writing system, and they created large monuments. I'm sure you're all familiar with the pyramids and the Sphinx. During the Old Kingdom, a strong central government was established, and the building of the pyramids began. During the Middle Kingdom, Egypt expanded south along the Nile and conquered Lower Nubia. So you can see the Old Kingdom is the darker color that's strictly right around the Nile. Middle Kingdom branches out a little from that, and then finally when we get to the New Kingdom, it's a much wider area. It's the lighter green. And establishes Egyptian control over quite a bit of area, all the way up into the areas of what are now modern-day Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. After the Middle Kingdom broke apart, Egypt was ruled by the Hyksos, a people of Asia, and nobody's really sure how they showed up. They just came on the scene real quick, took over very violently, but then the Egyptians overthrew them almost as quickly, and they began what became known as the New Kingdom. So it's the third phase of Egyptian society. And during this New Kingdom is when Egypt became the strongest and the wealthiest in the world. This is the time of the heavy building program of the Jewish slaves under Ramses that you may be familiar if you've ever seen the Ten Commandments movie or some of the other movies that are based on the building of the pyramids. Okay. A little bit on each kingdom. Old Kingdom. This is when the pharaoh was established as an absolute monarch. He's also believed to be a god, descended from Horus. Egyptian engineering improved. All the pyramids were built without using pulleys or wheels. They did it all with levers and brute strength. The pyramids were begun by 2 different pharaohs, Khufu and then his predecessor, Zoser. And they improved the hieroglyphics, became a much more clearer writing system. So the first pyramids were built under Khufu and Zoser during the Old Kingdom. Middle Kingdom. Start spreading out the idea of mummification to the lower classes. Before it was only something for the wealthy and the nobility. They dug a canal to the Red Sea, so they connected the Nile somewhere along in here to the Red Sea, so that you could now have traffic down the Nile and into the Red and expand your territory. Most likely, the original purpose was military. They built temples at Luxor and Karnak, which are famous Egyptian ruins nowadays. Trade expanded, partly because of the canal system. And then they're conquered by the Hyksos, who come out of Asia down into Egypt. So they come out of Asia down into Egypt like that. Under the New Kingdom, they get rid of the Hyksos. The empire expands. Hatshepsut is the first female pharaoh. Tutankhamun, known as King Tut, is buried with great riches. He's believed to have been one of the wealthiest of the pharaohs, at least of the crypts that have been discovered. And Akhenaten, a later pharaoh, tries to change the religion from worshiping one god to another. The sun god Ra to another god, Aten, who he believed in. Now, Egyptian religion is polytheistic, but they do have a chief god. Originally was Amun-Re. Later, by Akhenaten, tried to change it to Aten. Amun-Re was one of the names for the sun god. Osiris was the god of the Nile, and he controlled the annual floods that made the land fertile. So offerings were made to these gods to make sure the land stayed fertile, to make sure that the Nile would run as it was supposed to. Amun-Re to make sure the sun came out. The Egyptians also believed in a lot of other gods, and the key belief was in life after death. They prepared their dead for the afterlife through a preservation process called mummification, which I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with. The Egyptian rulers called the pharaoh, as I've already said, and the Egyptians believed the pharaoh was both a god and king. And this form of government is called a theocracy. Theo meaning god or religion, cracy meaning type of government. When the pharaoh died, he's buried in a majestic pyramid. The pyramids take years to build and require enormous planning and organization. When mummies of the pharaohs were buried in the pyramids, they were surrounded by the possessions for use in the afterlife. Often his slaves and servants and even relatives were buried with him, alive or dead. After the death of the pharaoh, power usually passed to another member of the family, often a son, but sometimes a brother, and on rare occasions, a sister or daughter. These ruling families are called dynasties because they pass from family member to family member. Egyptian society is divided into classes. Okay, and again, we've talked about this before where it's a pyramid structure. Okay, you had the pharaoh and his family on the top, the priests who served the gods and goddesses next, then the nobles who fought in the pharaoh's war, all your craftspeople and merchants, peasant farmers, and then finally the largest group are the slaves on the bottom. Women have slightly higher status in Egyptian society than any other ancient civilization. Women can own property, enter businesses deals, and obtain a divorce. They could also eventually become pharaoh. Some achievements of the Egyptian civilization. Egyptians learned much about the human body through the mummification process. They were very interested in anatomy and figuring out where things went and where they worked. And this allows them to diagnose many illnesses and perform surgery. There are some records of Egyptians performing a lot of medicine that we think is pretty modern by our standards. Surgeries and different things that they were able to do. And unfortunately, through the wars and the invasions of time, these techniques were lost and a lot of times had to be redeveloped. The Egyptians developed a calendar very similar to ours. They used a system of picture writing called hieroglyphics. Egyptian temples and monuments, as well as the pyramids, have survived for thousands of years. Some of these pyramids are 4,000 or 5,000 years old. And Egyptian statues and paintings show daily life, ceremonies, and their military victories. And often these are on great murals inside some of the graves of the great pharaohs. Here's an example of what the Egyptian calendar looked like. From a very early time, the ancient Egyptians had a form of calendar based upon the phases of the moon, followed a calendar system of 360 days with 3 seasons, each made up month for 4 months and 30 days in each month. So that is ancient Egypt. What I'd like you to think about for Monday is what criteria did the ancient Egyptians use to justify the order of their social pyramid? Who are the scribes of the 21st century and what power did they hold? And what are the criteria for determining the value of any given profession today? Salary, number of people helped, intellectual challenge, impact on the greater good. Because we'll be talking a little bit about social classes when we start talking about Egyptians and how the pyramids were built. So you need to have taken notes on this video, think about these 2 questions, and be ready for the quiz in class when you come in on Monday morning. Have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.